The Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you live this Wednesday night. Hopefully, this platform, we are using it for the second time, StreamYard, which is streaming to YouTube. Hopefully, you all are seeing our beautiful faces, hearing our wonderful voices. A lot to get to tonight, a ton to get to tonight. Before we kind of let you know what's going on, I want to bring in my co-host, John Sheeran. John, how are you, man? You got us a good get for a guest tonight.
Yeah, we'll save that announcement for later. But how was the Pacific Northwest? How's that rain? How's that rain? That kind of came out of nowhere.
So it was crazy, dude. I want to talk about that before. Well, yeah, I'll talk about that. So it was crazy. The rain was it kind of dumped on us for about 15 minutes or so in the game. It was coming down pretty hard, but then it just stopped, and then it was sunny. Really wasn't that cold. It was pretty awesome. So that the game itself was really fun. The stadium was awesome. The Seahawks fans were very cordial. And John, believe it or not, I was recognized in a number of places, as obviously subsequently you were, even though you weren't there. But they recognized us from this podcast. A lot of Bengals fans that were in Seattle recognized me walking down the street and in a restaurant bar before the game. Inside the stadium, they recognized us. Met a lot of cool people. I remember Brandon and Dalton and Eric and a lot of others out there. I know there were some others that wanted to meet up with us. I wanted to meet up with you as well. Unfortunately, it was a real quick trip, but had a great time. It was great meeting all of those Bengals fans. I got to also see a friend of mine that, kind of knows other friends and my wife and all kinds of stuff. So that was kind of cool. Really good experience, and it poured and actually thundered, which is rare, Saturday night, which was different. But all in all, good experience. I appreciate you asking, but I was very flattered that people recognized me, recognized us, know what we do, and listen to our show, man. It was pretty cool.
So did they ask like where I was when they saw you, essentially?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they're like, where's John? I said, well, he couldn't make it.
That is the ego. That is the ego boost.
Yeah, there you go. Well, some people were like, hey, they kind of saw my brother, and they're like, that's not John, is it? I'm like, no, it's my brother. It's not, So yeah, I mean, in that case, but they definitely talked about liking the show, and I was just really flattered, man. It was really cool. Really cool that
you're
people.
A celebrity. Are you a C or a D list at this point?
I'm probably D-, dude. I'm D- after that. But it was really cool meeting and talking with a bunch of people, and really cool experience. Bengals came up a little bit short, so that kind of stunk. But we will talk about that. We're going to break down the Bengals 1-point loss to the Seahawks. We'll talk about that. We've got a little bit of new Bengals news and notes to get to, so we will get to that. We have a special guest, as I teased early on. My co-host, John Sheeran, locked this one in for us. Eric Davis, former Super Bowl champion, former Pro Bowl cornerback who played for the Panthers and 49ers, among a couple of other teams. He will be joining us. He is now part of the Believe in 49ers podcast host. He's been on the NFL Network. He's a really popular guy. Stoked to have him on. We're going to preview the Week 2 matchup with the 49ers with him coming up about midway through the show. And then we're going to kind of close it up with some observations and predictions of our own for Week 2, some other little tidbits of information, announcements, all that stuff. We'll get to it all. We are so grateful that you are joining us live. And for those who download the program after the fact, thank you for your support as well. You can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone. You can get it on YouTube once again now, and in the great quality that we love to bring it to you. You can get it on YouTube and Cincy Jungle. Thanks for your support. We're excited that the season has started and getting you more and more content. John, what do we say we started off, man? A lot to talk about with the Week 1 game. There is a lot of hair tear out, frustrating moments by the team. A lot of people think it's a pleasant surprise as to even losing by a point in that venue against that quality opponent. Let's kind of start with the offense. Zach, the big thing was the offense because of Zach Taylor coming in and offensive mind. What were your thoughts on that? Because the Bengals, Andy Dalton had a career day, but they couldn't run the football. But super efficient in terms of the pass game. I mean, I have some observations of my own, but I'd like to hear yours in terms of what you saw from the offense specifically to start off as our breakdown here against the Seahawks.
I think we saw an equal balance of new things that are very much welcomed and some old things that still kind of need to be put on the back burner. And for the things that we'd like to see was the fact that they knew that Seattle was going to still have to stop the run, right? And the Seahawks were in their base defense for the most of the game, trying to contain Joe Mixon and Giovanni Bernard. So what did the Bengals do? They passed like 90% of the time for the first 20 or so plays. They realized that, hey, we're not having success running the ball against this defensive front. They obviously are very talented there, and their linebacker, specifically Bobby Wagner, completely stuffed the run game. Second level blocking was just not there all game. So what did the Bengals do? They didn't try to keep establishing the run. They just stuck to the pass. They stuck to what worked for against that defense and for that specific game plan. And Andy Dalton ended up with a career high in yards without AJ Green, which is something that I don't think any of us predicted at all, even if that secondary is still extremely weak. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw John Ross, Tyler Boyd, Damian Willis for a couple plays, both CJ Zoma, Tyler Eifert look so much more open, so much more separation on some of those classic routes that we just are just not used to seeing in the past in these Bengals offense with Andy Dalton. He looked a lot more calm and collected in some collapsing pockets when things were kind of breaking down in front of him. And we just saw the ball get out in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, the things that still didn't like to see and still kind of remind me of some unfortunate offenses in years past was the fact that in the second half, when things weren't exactly working, they weren't exactly adjusting the way I expected them to. Not only was the run game not working, but obviously the Seahawks started, shut down in the pass game a little bit, and then the offensive line kind of broke down as well. Like it held up for most of the game throughout the first half, and they kind of got away with it. But unfortunately, on one of their last drives that resulted in Randy Bullock's second field goal of the day, you had an Andre Smith hold and a Bobby Hart pressure that basically nullified the drive going all the way down to the 3, and they ended up kicking a short field goal. So those offensive line issues are still a persistent problem, and I do believe that they kind of influenced the fact that they didn't go for it on 4th and 7 because they didn't believe that the offensive line could buy Andy enough time to convert, on his own 44-yard line. So I do think that there's still significant issues at offensive tackle, obviously, when you have Andre Smith and Bobby Hart starting. And they kind of got stale in the second half, which is something I didn't want to see, especially against the defense that they were torching so easily. So I think it was an equal mix, but the positives, I think, are enough to come away with this game feeling more good than bad.
Okay, we'll talk about more about the overall feelings and takeaways from this game in just a minute. But I had an interesting vantage point, a much different vantage point than I usually do from my couch. I was my brother found these tickets that were actually 2 rows from the field, and they were on the visitor sideline. So got a really interesting view in terms of what was happening during the game. One of the things I saw, and I wrote about this on Cincy Jungle, one of the things I saw that I really, really liked, you mentioned maybe some of those in-game adjustments fell by the wayside a little bit as the game wore on, but I saw throughout most of it a lot of in-series switching out of guys, a lot more substitutions. I mean, CJ Uzomah and Tyler Eifert, I mean, it was almost like every play. It was boom, they're in, they're out, they're moving around in different that to me was very, very impressive. And maybe that's what a lot of good offenses do in general around the NFL. But watching this team, as we have over the past few years, that has not really been the case. So that, to me, I thought was very interesting. I also saw some people were critical of Andy Dalton missing a throw. They thought he was missing a throw to Tyler Boyd, and where, he maybe threw the ball and Tyler Boyd slipped. I saw more of just a freak accident. Tyler Boyd slipped on a cut because it looked like he was making a cut in, and that was where the throw was supposed to go. And given the fact that it just rained, it was turf, it was slippery, it just kind of didn't work out. That was a big play that was missed. Overall, Andy Dalton slightly underthrew some balls, but he hit John Ross on some big plays. John Ross had an outstanding day, but also a maddening day, a couple of drops. But overall, I mean, you got to like what you saw from the offense, and especially because Dalton really wasn't the most impressive quarterback of the trio they kept in the preseason. But he was really throwing to spots, throwing guys open, and guys were getting open. There's a lot of separation, and you got to like that. I don't know if you have any more additional thoughts on the offense. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the defense though as well, John, because that was, I think, even more surprising performance. 4 sacks, only gave up 20 points to a Seattle team at home. I thought that was a great job by Lou Anarumo. A lot of mixing up and masking of deficiencies, I thought, on that side of the ball.
I was charting the game the other day, and I didn't start counting the different variations of defensive line fronts until about the second quarter. But through the last 2/3 of that game, I got through 9 different permutations of how they grouped that defensive line. Whether they had 5 guys when they were in their 5-2 or 3-4 front, whatever you want to call it, or when they were in their basic 4-2 nickel fronts. But they had a ton of guys rotating, and then you mentioned on the offensive side of the ball, but on the defensive line, you have 9 guys active, and pretty much every one of them except Reynold Wren got equal opportunities in multiple spots. You had Josh Tupou playing both nose tackle and 3 technique. You had Ryan Glasgow playing a lot of 1 technique instead of Andrew Billings in your base 4-man fronts. But also you had Billings and Glasgow and Atkins alongside him at 3 technique. And then you had the stars of the defense in Carlos Dunlap and Sam Hubbard aligned as like a 3-4 outside linebacker in a 2-point stance and handling multiple responsibilities that come with that position. And it was arguably Sam Hubbard's best game of his career. And we've talked about Sam Hubbard over the offseason as a potential breakout performer. And it really does feel like he's lived up to the hype. It really does feel like all of that praise coming out of the building for him is really culminating into a special product on the field. 2 sacks, I think 10 combined tackles, a ton of defensive stops in the run game. And just, Hubbard, Dunlap, Nick Vigil, who was a QB spy for most of the game, did a great job of containing Russell Wilson. And that was something that also Seahawks fans were talking about. He looked kind of frazzled for a while there. He wasn't able to escape the pocket, make plays on his own, and really extend plays out of the pocket and throwing receivers open when he's going towards the sideline. And that was so critical, at least early on in the game, when the Seahawks offense was very stale and they weren't running the ball successfully, but they weren't letting Wilson kind of do his own thing, which is unfortunately a problem in that Seahawks offense and the problem that I was grateful to witness. But I think they had a great plan for how to contain Wilson, and holding them to 21 points, even though they only had like 3 receivers playing, I think was definitely a win for the defense. It's definitely a great statement made by Lou Anarumo.
Yeah, and I thought he and this coaching staff did what I think is their strength as a staff, because they're for the most part younger, more innovative minds. They know this is a flawed roster in certain spots, and what they did is they created plays and schemes and mismatches to maximize the strengths and mask the weaknesses. And I really thought that was the case on defense with the linebacker play, and they know they have the talent up front to get after the quarterback, which they did, and really didn't let Russell Wilson do much of anything with his legs, which is a big statement in itself. So I think there is. Keith Brewer in the live YouTube chat talks about Sam Mother Hubbard, woohoo hoo day. So yeah, Sam Hubbard had a big day. So very good day by the defense. Look, the big question now, John, is, you take the offensive performance, which was outstanding as a passing game, especially minus Cordy Glenn, minus AJ Green. You lose Joe Mixon midway through the game. Not great as a running game. I mentioned some of the issues of those guys missing. Defensively, overall, a pretty sound game. A very up and down day from the special teams unit. Randy Bullock misses a critical field goal. Alex Erickson has an uncharacteristic fumble on a punt return. But Kevin Huber had a good day. I guess where I'm going with this is, how encouraged are you here? I hate to talk about moral victories, because if you lose, right? But quite honestly, when we were talking to people downtown and talking to Bengals fans there, none of us knew what to expect in terms of, it was either going to be a blowout or it was going to be something like this, right? So, and blowout not in the Bengals' favor.
Right.
So I guess, how encouraged are you? I kind of waver, because I'm like, well, this was a very tough game in a tough venue, and the Bengals showed a lot that I liked. But there are the silly mistakes that come from an inexperienced roster, a roster full of new coaches, turnovers. I don't know. I kind of weigh that, and I don't really know where to sit.
Well, you say silly mistakes by an unexperienced roster when most of the mistakes I saw in the first half came from one of the more experienced guys in Dre Kirkpatrick. And unfortunately, that's kind of
Yeah,
what you get with Dre. Everything kind of evens out to the median when you take into account of all of his dumb mistakes. His personal foul penalty and his missed tackle essentially gave up 7 points. He also tripped. He also recovered the Preston Brown fumble. And yeah, he kind of got tripped up by DK Metcalf, but it looked like he just tripped on his leg. So I'm still going to let the jokes fly with that one. So he almost cost the Bengals 14 points in that sense. But
all
regardless,
right,
for as much as the troubles that Andre Smith and Bobby Ard had, I don't think they had a false start all game in a very hostile environment in Seattle. So that was a positive to take away from that. I think at the end of the day, like they looked better than I thought, and they looked better than a lot of people thought they were going to look. They moved up like 6 spots in NFL.com power rankings. I think 6 more spots in the Athletic power rankings. Like this team is intriguing at the very least. We don't know if they're going to be good or not because there's still so much unknown. There's still a lot of guys who are injured, and the schedule could be either very tough or very easy depending on how other teams fare out. But regardless, this was a game that nobody expected them to win, and they were very close to doing so. And with that said, with the fact that they missed a 45-yard field goal, they almost returned a fumble for a touchdown. You have your quarterback, have a freak fumble inside the red zone right after that fumble recovery. The Seahawks also made a lot of mistakes too. Their game plan on offense was definitely not very smart for what the Bengals were doing, and the fact that they just kept trying to run the ball when it just wasn't working. The fact that on that John Ross second touchdown, that free safety took one of the worst angles and timed the worst jumps I've ever seen. If that's Earl
right.
Thomas back there, that might be an interception, and instead it's a 55-yard touchdown to John Ross. But I think you can kind of go back and forth for some of these. And I definitely think that the refs were probably more on the side of the Bengals. I think there was more calls against Seattle that were a little bit questionable. There was that pass interference challenge that ended up going Cincinnati's way. It was kind of evening out for all the intangible factors that didn't happen on the field. And unfortunately, when you're facing a team on the road where they haven't lost a home opener in 10 years against one of the very elite quarterbacks in the NFL, a 1-point loss is definitely far from the worst. So yes, no moral victories, but there's definitely more positives to take away from this game than I think a lot of us expected to going in.
Yeah, vape guy who I think is our good friend John from Cincinnati. Zach is reminding me of Sam Weish. We're already 100% better than with Marvin. Will Smith says, I like the fact that Ross dropped the easy one. Then the next play they went back at him. Marvin would have benched him. So there's some echoing sentiments there. I tend to agree with you, John. I mean, you look at the disparity of the total yards. They had, I think, almost 200 total yards more than the Seattle Seahawks. They had about 200 plus yards more of passing than the Seattle Seahawks. They hogged the ball for more than almost 12 minutes more in terms of time of possession. But then you look at it, 3 turnovers versus 1. The sacks, they gave up 5, they had 4. There's a lot of stuff where you go, it's tough to weigh. I think overall we should all be encouraged. I think this team, they may have known a little something that none of us did. They talked the talk, but they went out there and for the most part walked quite a bit of the walk. They keep claiming they're going to be competitive and all of that. You mentioned an interesting facet about who knows what's going to happen with the schedule based on what Cleveland looked like and what Pittsburgh looked like in week 1. Good Lord, terrible showings.
Yeah, that made me feel better at the end of the night.
Yeah, terrible showings by those teams. So, who knows? They could be off to a little bit of an easier start on that front going forward. But obviously, they need to get guys healthy. The tough thing is, these first 4 games, which are critical. 3 of them are on the road this week against the 49ers being the exception. So some tough stuff ahead. But for now, I think we should all be encouraged as to what the Bengals showed against what should be a quality Seahawks team in one of the toughest venues in the NFL and in not great weather. So, I think all those variables play into the Bengals corner in terms of potential future outlook. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to be joined in just a few minutes by Eric Davis, former Pro Bowl cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers. He's going to help us preview the Week 2 game between the Bengals and the Niners coming up here. We're excited to have him on. But you can get this show, in case you're new to it, on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play. You can get it on Megaphone. You can get it on YouTube and cincyjungle.com. Before we bring in Eric Davis, John, just some news and notes. And I think you wrote on some of this, one of which is, well, a lot of it actually has to do with AJ Green, either people talking about AJ Green talking really for the first time since his injury. You put up a post, I believe it was on Wednesday, Tyler Boyd talking about, AJ Green's return. Not many people are going to be talking about the Browns anymore. Nothing more than kind of hype up speak from a player, or I don't know. How do you feel about that?
That's Tyler Boyd, man. Like him and Joe Mixon just have that bravado and that confidence to them. And I think it would have a little bit more weight if they didn't have to wait like 3 months until they play them. I think they play them the first time in like the first week of December. Who knows if Cleveland's going to be good or bad by then? Who knows if the Bengals are going to be good or bad by then? So those matchups will have some extra heat with them. But nah, man. Like I think there's just momentum right now with how this offense looked, and I think just the recent development with AJ kind of just put everybody in good spirits, and the fact that AJ is talking up Zach Taylor in ways that he never really talked up Marvin Lewis before, talking about how smart he is on the sideline, and talking about in-game adjustments, actually just mentioning that phrase, and the fact that the head coach acknowledges that they exist. I think there's a lot of good spirits right now, and I think that was just Boyd just being who Boyd is.
So AJ Green talked about, his injury and the timetable of return and all of that is still kind of up in the air, but he was kind of doing some rehab field work, has been running on a treadmill. So that's kind of positive news. Jeff Hobson still talks about the Steelers game as his possible return. Do you think he comes back any sooner based on the fact it seems as if he is ahead of schedule, or do you think they're going to play it safe?
I have no idea. I really don't. I think I would also say that the Steelers game is probably the earliest that he comes back. But because I think having him for 11 strong games, I think is better than having him for 11 strong games in like a half game where he could threaten to get, or there's a bigger risk of him re-injuring. I think just how important he is going to allow them to just take their time with this and not completely rush him back. Obviously, they want him back as soon as possible, but I think like a week ago, we weren't even sure when he was going to get the boot off, and now he has the boot off. And I think we just need to kind of calm down here and not rush this to a point where it can get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, and unfortunately, on the injury front, the Bengals have another we mentioned it briefly. They have another on the injury front with Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon tweaked his ankle. Luckily, he had an MRI earlier in the week, and luckily it shows no significant damage. So he's kind of been day to day. He sat out practice on Wednesday. If I were, based on how they've been with injuries so far this year, I would probably guess he doesn't play this week, but I don't know. What do you think?
No, I don't think he plays. If he didn't practice today, like he could get like a full practice on Friday, but I hope Trevion Williams comes back too, but I'm not sure if he practiced it. I must have missed that update. If Williams can go, then I don't think Mixon's going to go. If neither can go, I don't think that's ideal, but I think you're just going to see a lot more Giovanni Bernard and a little bit of Samaje Perine. But unless he goes full on Thursday after not going at all today, I don't think he goes, which is all in all, if you miss one game, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, he missed 2 last year due to injury, so we'll see what happens there. But I would think he probably does not play this week if he's day to day, and the way the team has been handling injuries, and the fact that, simply put, they can't afford to lose any more high profile players for extended periods of time, so they want to let that heal up. So that in itself is kind of some interesting bits of news for the Cincinnati Bengals here. Another piece of news that may not be so grabby in terms of headlines, but there's a couple of players who were let go, reserve players, and the team made one acquisition. We'll start with the Bengals waiving Jeff Driscoll from IR, obviously going to get an injury settlement there, but I guess it's kind of predictable, right? I mean, the Bengals went with Dolagala, and they drafted Finley, and then they obviously like what Dalton does in the offense, so that's the direction they're heading, and Driscoll's not their guy.
It's all it is. Like, there's no reason for him to be here for the foreseeable future. I mean, he's not going to play all this year, but get an opportunity somewhere else, man. There's people looking at for quarterbacks everywhere.
Yep. Yep. And I don't know how significant his injury is, but I think they kind of tried to do him a little bit of a solid by keeping him around a little bit and moving on from him a little bit further down the road. But we'll see what happens with him. But Jeff Driscoll is no longer on the Bengals as of Wednesday. Earlier in the week, the Bengals got rid of kind of a surprising move. They got rid of Jordan Willis, veteran defensive end, former third-round pick, still a young player. They got rid of him and picked up it was Leroy Reynolds, I believe,
yeah.
the linebacker, a little bit of a smaller linebacker. So interesting move there. I hate to say I told you so, but I kind of figured the Bengals were going to pick up somebody, and it was going to be after week 1 because the contract is not fully, you can't get the fully guaranteed money as a player. And the Bengals have done this time and time again in terms of picking up a guy after a game or two. But it was a little surprising that it was at the sacrifice of Willis to me. But the Bengals also had such a great performance from some of their main guys up front last week. Maybe they feel that they can, let it ride with those guys, and they need to beef up the linebacker corps.
Yeah, unfortunately, Willis is just a smaller Marcus Hunt at this point, just a preseason star that just has not developed very much from his college days. And maybe he pulls a Marcus Hunt and improves wherever he goes next. I think he's with the Jets now. I think the Jets, who picked 3rd in the draft, picked up a waiver for him, and there were a few teams that tried to claim him on waivers. So obviously, he was a very popular name there. Again, 3rd-year guy, but just it just never clicked. And unfortunately, that's an athlete who tested a lot better than what he looked like in college and produced at a high level in college. But if there was a clear difference from the time that he and Carl Lawson both entered the league about who was ready to contribute immediately. And obviously Willis was not there. And unfortunately, very similar to the offensive line in the NFL. If you don't have the proper technique entering the league, coaches are not going to take a lot of time for you to get up to speed because they got to implement scheme and implement the system altogether. So unfortunately, I just think Willis just kind of fell behind the learning curve a little bit. And in year 3, with a staff that invested nothing in him because it was the former coaching staff that really put it all on the line for him, it was just time to go. And when you have 11 defensive linemen and you only can activate 8 or 9, and he's just not as talented as the other guys, there's just not a lot of value for him. As soon as Kerry Wynn kind of stepped in, his entire value just evaporated. So best of luck to him. But that 2017 class, man, a lot of it is gone now. And unfortunately, the top 2 are looking very good, but a lot of it is evaporated into the air.
Yeah, gosh, when you look at some of the recent high picks for the Cincinnati Bengals, really dating back to about 2015 or so, 1st-round picks, 2nd-round picks, 3rd-round picks, there are not a lot of guys left on the roster. I mean, obviously you've got your Joe Mixon and Jonah Williams is here, but he's hurt. You've got others that are still around, but man, those are the picks that you build a franchise around, and they're, it's hurting the team. It really is. Do you foresee Willis? You mentioned his good kind of workouts and all of that. Do you foresee him catching on somewhere and maybe just in a different scheme, kind of doing what Marcus Hunt was able to do for a couple of years with the Colts and be somewhat productive? Or do you think he's just not an NFL caliber player?
Well, the good news is he's with the Jets, and the Jets have literally no no edge rushers. Excuse me. They have plenty of guys in the interior, but they drafted Polite from Florida, and they cut him as a 3rd-round pick. So they were definitely in desperate need of edge rushers. So if there's any place where he can get opportunity to prove his worth, that's probably a good place for him to start. That's another odd front scheme, so he's going to be used a little bit differently than how he was here. But and again, that's kind of what happened with Marcus Hunt too. He went from a 4-3 to a more traditional 3-4, which kind of fit his body type as a defensive end, playing more as a 5 technique. So again, there was flashes in the preseason with Willis, but unfortunately, that was just against a lot lesser competition. And unless something really just clicks with his hand usage and his mental processing as a pass rusher, he's just a guy that just can barely stick around as a baseline edge defender. And unfortunately, with the Bengals, there was just too many of those guys to keep besides him.
So aside from these, I mean, again, there's a little bit of a walking wounded vibe going on here. Aside from some of these injuries and departures for the Bengals, coming up here, heading into week 2, there are some different players who are not practicing. AJ Green still won't play this week. Joe Mixon is day to day, but as we said, did not practice as of Wednesday. He may go Sunday, but we'll see what happens. The other thing, Cordy Glenn still not practicing with the concussion. Is it time to worry about that being kind of a long-term lingering thing, or are they still just being uber cautious here?
Like it's a concussion. Like these things hurt. Like
Yeah.
I think we're extremely desensitized to guys coming back from like a week or two from concussions. We see it all the time. So if a guy misses more than just a couple weeks, you're thinking, oh man, it must be a serious concussion. All concussions are serious. If you suffer enough,
Yeah.
your life expectancy goes down. I never played football. I never experienced CTE. I don't want to. I don't want to speak for anybody who has to go through that. So yes, it's serious because it's a concussion. And unfortunately, the protocol for most NFL teams in years past has just been, oh, you pass a little light test, you'll be out for a week. Like, just silent him for as long as he needs, man. Like at this point, there's not too much difference between Andre Smith and Cordy Glenn right now, especially a Cordy Glenn who's coming off of a concussion. So wait till he's 110%. Wait till he's comfortable, and maybe he'll be back in a couple weeks. But if not, it's a concussion, and it has to be treated as a serious case.
Yep. I mean, we were used to, and it really wasn't that long ago that those were, oh, he's out for a week, but he'll come back. And now, these things linger. The repercussions of having that injury they kind of reverberate for a long time. So the 49ers also are hurting at the running back position a bit. They lost Jerick McKinnon again for the second year in a row for the season. Tevin Coleman suffered a high ankle sprain against Tampa Bay in week 1, so he probably won't be playing. So Matt Breida and Jeff Wilson seem to be the guys who will be taking the snaps for the Niners there. Tyler Eifert got a veteran rest day. I'm assuming there's not really much else going on there, and they're just kind of trying to play it safe with him. And then on the good news front, Auden Tate, who hurt his knee and wasn't seen much on last Sunday, he appears to be. He practiced on Wednesday in a full capacity, so he appears to be en route to potentially returning to the Bengals. Do you see him maybe having any impact at all this week? Or are they going to kind of continue what they did last week and really focus on Boyd and Ross?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to me because if he can play, then I would assume he gets activated over Farrah Cooper. And Cooper was primarily used on special teams, but not in the same roles that Auden Tate was used. Cooper was used on punt returns and kickoff returns when Tay was mainly used in the preseason as kickoff coverage and punt coverage. So two different roles for those guys in terms of who was replacing like Cody Core. That was mainly, I think, Brandon Wilson, maybe a little bit of Tony McRae as like that classic gunner. So I don't know off the top of my head who's going to be active over either Cooper or Tate, but obviously Tate has the more offensive value, and it just depends on how they want to use him on special teams because that's really the bulk of where he's going to play. And when Cooper was on the field, I don't think he got any targets. I think for the most part he was just used as a run blocker, and like we've talked about, Tate has really made strides there. So I think there's so much more value with Tate over Cooper, but it just depends on how they kind of divvy up the special teams reps, I guess.
Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of the state of both teams going into this week here. Also interesting, Nick Bosa is the what was he, a top 5 pick here this year? He did not practice as of Wednesday either, so he's got some sort of ankle injury, and I think that was what he suffered in the preseason that kind of kept him out for a long time.
I wonder if that's just like a day off though, because he looked pretty damn good on Sunday.
Yeah,
and he was just like coming back from that. He missed the entire preseason.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's kind of rest, full go maybe, and that's how the 49ers are playing it. We're waiting on hearing from Eric Davis of the Believe in 49ers network. He's going to help us preview the 49ers game in just a minute here. John, there was a question from someone in our live chat. It was from Derek Rogers, thoughts on the linebacker we added today. The Bengals didn't add a linebacker today, I don't believe. I think it was maybe the one yesterday that we mentioned earlier, Leroy Reynolds. Any thoughts about him and potential impact on the team, and how he may, if at all, be impactful?
Yeah, so he was one of the 7 guys that they brought in for a visit last week. He was one of the older players that they brought in. He's 28 years old. He's been in the league for, I believe, his 8th year now. His major contribution so far in his career was with the 2016 Atlanta Falcons that eventually went on almost win the Super Bowl, attend the Super Bowl. That was when I think he played the most snaps recently. He's kind of bounced around after that. He hasn't really played much regular season action on defense. He's mainly just been a special teamer. And I think that's what they're going to count on him for now. Like we saw, they only played like Nick Vigil and Preston Brown primarily on defense last week. Jermaine Pratt got 3 snaps. Jordan Evans got no snaps. Those guys are just special teamers. So if Reynolds is active, he would just be a special teamer. Like we should not expect him to be on the field for the defense at all. And there's not very much value that he brings there. He's kind of a smaller guy. I think he's about 6 foot 230. 28 years old, so he brings more veteran experience than anybody in that group for linebackers, which now the number is 5. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets active over one of the guys on the defensive line, because now that group is a little bit smaller. But yeah, if he does play, special teams for him. Unfortunately, there's just not that big of a role until unfortunately it needs to be a big role.
So that's kind of the major news and notes for the Cincinnati Bengals as they head into week 2. The Bengals are 0-1. The Niners did beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 31-17. So they have they're coming off a nice win from there, and we'll see how they respond this week. John, how do you feel about this one going into it?
I don't know, because I think right now the odds or the line is +2 for the Bengals, because the 49ers are 1-0 and the Bengals are 0-1. But there was just a lot of talk about how Garoppolo just didn't play very well against the Buccaneers, but it was a 2-touchdown game because the Buccaneers were just that worse. So maybe we haven't gauged a good understanding of how good this 49ers team is, but there's a lot of potential for them to be dangerous. And I think that starts with Kyle Shanahan. He's one of the very few offensive geniuses that I think, deserve that acclaim. And there's just not a lot of big names on that offense. You have Marquise Goodwin, Dante Pettis. They have another rookie receiver whose name I'm forgetting. No, Deebo Samuel. And Jimmy Garoppolo, who again hasn't played well of late, and he's just coming off a torn ACL, but they still put up 31 points, on the road against the Buccaneers, against a defense that should have improved this offseason. So there's just a lot of potential for them to be a lot more dangerous than I think a lot of us are leading on, because this was a team that won like 2 or 3 games last year. But Shanahan did manage to get pretty equal production from Nick Mullins that he did from Jimmy Garoppolo before Garoppolo got hurt. So maybe it'll take time for Garoppolo to get really acclimated into the Shanahan system, but they have the potential to be very dangerous, and primarily because a great offensive line led by an offensive tackle that I wanted the Bengals to draft, and Mike McGlinchey at right tackle, Joe Staley, who might be a borderline Hall of Famer left tackle. He's still kicking it. He's still really good, and that defensive line is dangerous. When you invest so many first-round picks, like, it's got to be good at some point. And like, one of their high picks isn't even playing, it's Solomon Thomas. So it's just the addition of Nick Bosa to that defensive line. They can give them similar, if not more, troubles than the Seahawks did. So I think there's potential for this game to be just as close as it was last week, even though the 49ers on paper may not be as dangerous as we might think.
Yeah, and the Bengals, as they returned home in the preseason, they played some of their better football there. Really, the last couple of games. So maybe a return home will also equate to a win here. Some of the things that I find interesting. You talked about Garoppolo, and I'm waiting to hear. Once Eric Davis comes on, I'm hoping we can ask him about that. But one of the one of the aspects is Garoppolo was, I mean, it was well known he struggled throughout the preseason and then really didn't play that great against a not so great Tampa Bay team this first week. One touchdown, one interception. So I don't know how big of a threat he truly is. You mentioned that he may still be acclimating to things and obviously coming off a pretty bad injury. So I don't know. What are your overall kind of thoughts or inklings of the Bengals' chances as they head into this week?
Well, again, I think if they play like last week, the mistakes will kind of even out. I think the run blocking is probably going to even out to be better. I think they're going to get some more communication on some of those combo blocks that were unfortunately the reason why the running game was not really working against Seattle, because overall the offensive line I think played well for 3 quarters, and in pass protection it held up about as well as it could against an absolute bowling ball in Jadeveon Clowney. And in the run game, I thought they got decent push on the first level, but unfortunately, just got to clean up on some of that second level blocking. So it'll be interesting to see how different or similar the game plans are from an offensive standpoint. But just like the Seahawks, I think that secondary for the 49ers is extremely volatile and extremely exploitable. I know they still have Richard Sherman, but he just got his first interception last week for the first time since like 2017. And I'm not sure if I can name one of their safeties as well. So there's a lot of potential for Dalton to keep up his hot streak without AJ Green. And, you know, I think only like 4 or 5 running backs in total are going to be active for this game. So there's going to be a lot of passing as well. And Shanahan likes to pass out of that 21 personnel where he has 2 running backs on the field. One of them is primarily a fullback in Kyle Juszczyk. So a lot of passing in this game. There's going to be a lot of continued rotation for both defensive lines. It might just come down to who really gets tired first, because this game can honestly go into the high 20s for how exploitable both defenses are and how much of an unknown both offenses are in terms of scheme and personnel and guys coming back from injury and all that stuff. So I don't have too big of an issue with them being 2-point underdogs, because again, it's a losing team facing off against a winning team. But at the same time, like, for as much unknown that the Bengals have for the 49ers, I think it's equal amounts of unknown that the Bengals don't know about the 49ers. So again, like, I like what I saw last week, and I think there's similar parts of the 49ers that they can, kind of capitalize on. But at the same time, it's still Kyle Shanahan, and he's still an offensive genius, and they still have playmakers that can really rip this secondary apart.
Yeah, one of the things I thought the Bengals did well last week that really, I mean, we saw throughout the preseason, even under Zach Taylor, but definitely under the preceding regime and even before that, is the tight end. Tight ends killing them. That didn't really take shape this last week with Will Dissly, who Seahawks fans really liked him. Brandon Schultz last week, who joined us, talked about Will Dissly as a guy they really liked. I think he only had like 1 catch. So I thought that was a very interesting and great job by the interesting facet, and great job by the Bengals defense to corral him. Obviously, George Kittle is a very good player. Are you scared of that matchup?
Absolutely. Kittle might be the best tight end in the league. And that's coming from a UC fan who loves Travis Kelce. Like, the fact that he is as good of a receiver as he is a blocker, and he's essentially a younger Rob Gronkowski at this point, because he's so nasty in the run game, and he can get to linebackers very quickly, and he can just bulldoze any edge defender that he comes up against. But yards after catch, man, like, Shanahan loves those play action rollouts where he just dumps off to Kittle either in the flat or running like a little medium crosser, and just get Kittle moving with the ball, get some momentum with him. Like, it's hard enough to cover him. It's even harder to tackle him in the open field. And I think almost 60 or 70% of his yards last year came after the catch, and he got well over 1,000 yards. And that was with Nick Mullins as his quarterback. So now he has Garoppolo, who should be better from a talent perspective, even though he might not be all the way there yet. But they're going to have to get creative with how they can kind of minimize the impact that Kittle has. Like, last week, it was keeping Russell Wilson in the pocket and make him try to work things from a limited space. Now it's got to be basically bracketing a tight end who primarily lines up from an inline position. So a lot of stress on Nick Vigil, Sean Williams, Clayton Fejedelem, whoever lines up from a strong side perspective over the line of scrimmage, and kind of just press him at the line, bracket him, make sure he doesn't get comfortable releasing off of the line of scrimmage. And Shanahan is gonna find a way to probably adjust for that, later on in the game, and maybe split him out wide a little bit more. But like I said, they might not run the ball as much as as much as the Seahawks did last week because they're only going to have 2 running backs active. So they're going to try to, utilize, Matt Breida and George Kittle as extensions of the running game with some short, quick passes to try to get the ball out of Garoppolo's hands a little bit quicker. And that's definitely going to be something that they need to capitalize on. Make sure that if Kittle destroys them, it's in the underneath game and wrap him up quickly and get to him quickly because he's a big man to bring down.
Yeah. Like I said, obviously last week they did a good job corralling Disley, but Kittle's a different animal altogether. And, who knows if now the Bengals have now that they've put stuff on tape, if teams are going to play, if they're going to be able to catch up on stuff, maybe that, the Bengals did not put out on tape during the preseason, or if it's, if the team kind of is still able to do what they want to do, even though now, they've tipped their hand a little bit in terms of potential predictable play calling, that sort of thing. So we'll see what happens there. I have a pretty good feeling about this week, John. Personally speaking, I think that the Bengals, this is a game that they can handle. At least based on some things we saw last week. Obviously got to clean some stuff up, but I think they probably could come out victorious, maybe a 23-17 score for me. I don't know about you.
Here's my thing. The 0-2 curse is extremely real. Like from 1995 to 2013, 12% of the teams who finished 0-2 failed or didn't or make the playoffs. So 88% of the teams who start the season 0-2 missed the playoffs. So obviously that pressure is extremely high. It's going to be maybe the hottest game in the history of Paul Brown Stadium, approaching, I think, 95 degrees. And you're going to wear all black. Like that's the plan. They're gonna bring out the black pants for this one. They're going to be sweating their butts off, but right after kickoff.
Yeah,
I don't know about that one.
Yeah,
It's a great passion statement, but I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know it was going to be that warm. How's the humidity? What's the humidity like?
Oh, we're right next to the river, man. Like it just rained a little bit this week. It might rain at the end of this week. Oh my god, this could be a nightmare. I definitely would not want to go to this game.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it still probably will be packed. A lot of people are starting to buy back in, it seems, into the Bengals and what Zach Taylor is selling them, and obviously based on what they did last week. I do feel good about this game, but I do think this team needs to potentially get to at least 2-2 through these first 4 weeks. If they can get two games out of these first 4, preferably with one of them being against Pittsburgh, I think that that will go a long way for the rest of the season. Even though that the opponents aren't overly tough, the Bills, I think, are beatable. 49ers are beatable. Pittsburgh at least looks beatable. The Bengals almost had one first week. I just think that those 3 road games to start the season is really tough on a team. So if they're able to get to 500 at least, I think that'll go a long way and maybe, having them be competitive down the stretch.
I'm just glad that we're not facing Pittsburgh this week because it would be a complete we're on to Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing. Yeah, that's probably a good thing. And maybe hopefully they get a win or two before facing Cincinnati, so they're not they're not all over us. Well, we're waiting to hear from Eric Davis. He had confirmed with us earlier in the week, so we're waiting to hear from him to help us break down the rest of week 1 and hear kind of from the other side of the fence. Obviously, he is with the Believe in 49ers podcast. So hopefully we will get him before shows end. But you got our take on it, at least based on some things that we saw last week. And you can get this show, as I've mentioned, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get it on CincyJungle.com. It's on YouTube. You can also get it wherever you get all of your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and Megaphone. It's also shot out on other platforms there. So check it out how you can. We appreciate the support. And a little bit of a programming note, or, just some updates. For those who subscribe to our channel, the Cincy Jungle. It's now called the Cincy Jungle Podcast Channel because we were adopted under this SB Nation umbrella of podcasts just a little bit ago. And we've been excited about that, and we've been basically kind of the main show there, usually doing 2-3 episodes at least a week. Usually, this main episode, the listener question stuff that we do, and then obviously post game reactions and or breaking news stuff, that sort of thing. The channel is expanding, and it's expanding beyond this show, which is pretty cool. So for now, there might be a couple of more programs coming down the pike. We'll let you know about that. But for now, those of you who watch D&H Sports with Daddy-O McDuck, maybe if you do subscribe to our channel, you kind of saw one episode, I guess, sort of randomly in there. So if you are familiar with his show, or if you're not familiar with his show, definitely check it out. My co-host is on there somewhat regularly, I think, right, John?
I'm the face of the I'm the only face of the show. It's me and two puppets. We have animated puppets to life, and they are just the weirdest people you'll ever meet. So definitely check us out.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very unique, but still great insight. And John is a regular contributor on that program as well. So when you get sick of hearing my voice, seeing my face, all that kind of stuff, then if you prefer John, you get to hear him more often now. And then there also might be a couple more additions coming down the pike, as I mentioned. Probably programs that you are familiar with, other Bengals programs that you are familiar with, and we're hoping that ends up being a pretty solid relationship. I wanted to kind of do, while we're still waiting here, I kind of wanted to do just kind of a little mini segment on something, and it's, a lot of people play fantasy football, a lot of people bet on football, that sort of thing. So I kind of wanted to say, what are bad beats, best bets, that sort of thing of the week. Either ones we experienced, or if we want to give, hey, maybe think about putting some money down on this game. That maybe that's some advice we could maybe give you. But I will tell you this, John, I had a pretty loaded fantasy football team. And in doing so, I sat John Ross and Sammy Watkins in my first week 1 matchup because I had many others that were projected to do well. And I sat those guys. Of course, I was kind of like, well, Ross may have a decent game, but I kind of want to wait and see. And in doing so, I left about 75 fantasy points on the board. Or off the board, however you want to look at it. And the worst part was I lost to my brother, who, of course, let me hear about it. So that was my bad beat of the week. And that's why when we do the fantasy football advice shows on here, it is usually with Scott Schulte, because I make decisions like that a little too frequently. So that was my bad beat of the week. Now, hopefully you've got something maybe a little bit more positive or insightful than something that caused me to lose my fantasy game.
That is exactly why I quit fantasy, because I last year I benched Derrick Henry when he scored like 50 points or something like that in December. Yes. I had to get out of the industry. But I'm looking at I'm looking at some of the lines here for these week 2 matchups. I do think that so the line for now for the Bengals is -2. So I think it's flipped from +2 to -2 over the past couple of days. But also I'm looking at some other lines. If anybody, and I mean anybody, puts down Patriots -18.5, throw your money down a well. Like I understand everything that's going on with the Dolphins and players wanting out, and now the Patriots are dealing with a fiasco themselves. But man, 18-point road favorites. That's just put it on the Dolphins, man. Just put a couple bucks on the Dolphins. Don't think twice about it. If they really do cover, good for them. But man, that's so. And there's another one here. Cardinals are +13 against the Ravens. Like the Ravens just destroy the Dolphins. The Dolphins are single-handedly manipulating like multiple lines for this week. Like I don't know, man. Like 13 points against the Cardinals, who by all means came back and almost beat the Lions at home from like a 16-point deficit. I like the Ravens a lot right now, but I don't know, man. Those are two lines that I think a lot of people should get up on. Like we just saw the Bengals lose by 1 when they were 9.5-point dogs on the road. Like I don't know. I just think it's way too early in the league year to really capitalize on some of those ridiculous bets.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in a survival pick'em league, and everybody and almost everybody's picking the Patriots in that, and I don't feel good about that.
Like they're gonna win, but I mean,
probably, yeah. But kind of in the off chance that maybe Miami pulls an upset, that would knock out a lot of people in the survival league for me. So but that's a tough bet to take, and obviously we've seen week one mean a lot and also mean nothing. I mean, teams go and they show some things, and then it never really either they impress and then they just kind of fall by the wayside, or it's just a fluke deal in the first week. They didn't play well, so kind of interesting to see how that'll all play out, especially with this New England game. Very interesting to see. I'm very interested to see how the Browns end up rebounding, if at all, or if the Steelers do the same. Obviously very poor showings by both of those teams going forward, but such is life. Well, I think we're going to have to maybe either reschedule or I don't know, John. What do we think?
We don't play the 49ers again.
Well, maybe later in the week is what I mean. Maybe we can get him for a separate time. I don't know what happened there. Sounded like he was confirmed, and I don't know. So if you hear something, John, let me know, and we'll try.
Yeah, because I don't like lying to thousands of people. So
I don't.
We'll try to get this figured out.
I don't either. But that's okay. These things happens to everybody. We apologize that we promoted a guy who I guess didn't show up, but that's okay. We still talked about the game itself. You never really gave a prediction. You're a little worried. You said because of the weather. Do you have a score prediction or anything like that?
I think it's going to be high scoring. I really do. I think you're going to see a lot of passing. I think Garoppolo's going to be a little bit better. I think Dalton's going to play about the same. Might not look the same in the box score, but overall, I think you're going to see similar, strengths and similar weaknesses from the Bengals offense, and hopefully they get more of a second half groove going. And also, like last year, for as much as we dogged on the offense, sucking in key situations, they were third in red zone offense, and I think that's something that a lot of people forget about Bill Lazor in his short tenure here. They were 0-3 this week in the red zone in terms of converting to touchdowns. That's definitely something that has to improve if you want to beat a Kyle Shanahan-led offense. I'm going to go in the area of like 27-24 Bengals.
Okay, so you think they'll pull it off?
Barely cover.
Yeah. Well, the 27 indicates that there would at least need to be 2 field goals made by Randy Bullock. So that in itself may be a little bit of a.
He made 2 this week, but unfortunately missed 1.
Yeah. I kid, but I don't at the same time. Before we get out of here, I just want to reiterate it was nice meeting a lot of you who tune into this podcast and or read cincyjungle.com, that I met in Seattle of all places. Just highly random and very flattering that you would recognize the work that John and I do. And I'm grateful. It was really neat hanging out with quite a few of you, and just very, very cool. And Wayne Downey says new subscriber from Columbus. Houday. Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate it. So I don't know, man. It was very cool. And then one little tidbit story that if you followed me on Twitter, you probably would have read, but I did not share at the beginning, was the fact that basically where we were sitting right behind us was Joe Kelly, the former linebacker of the Cincinnati Bengals who played on the '88 Super Bowl team. Heck of a nice guy. He was there with his wife. He still is in great contact with a lot of players with the team, both current and his old team. So my brother and I got to talk to him. Very nice guy. Showed us his AFC Championship ring. He was rocking it, man. It was very cool. That kind of stuff. When you do these kinds of trips, it's pretty cool. you meet a lot of people that you don't expect to meet and run into a lot of different people. The world's a funny place, man. But we had a good time, and I was glad that we ended up doing it. So I'm pretty stoked on it. You and I got to meet up and get to a game. It's probably going to have to be your neck of the woods, though, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I think those flights in LA cost a little bit more, but yeah, I mean, my
Don't
door's
fly
open
in
if you.
LAX. LAX is terrible to fly into.
I did it once, and
Oh,
honestly, I probably wouldn't do it again.
no,
But
don't.
it's my,
Terrible.
my door's open if your door's open, man.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You gotta let me know. Unfortunately we've got a couple teams in LA, but and if we had the LA game set up, we had it set up this year with the Rams,
We're
but
still on about this. We're still on about this.
I know. I can't let it go. I hang on to things. Can you tell? Well, I think that's going to do it for us tonight. Any final thoughts before we jam out of here, John?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, you're good. John's good. We're all good. Enjoy the game this weekend. We'll try and get Eric Davis maybe for a subsequent later interview this week. So we will let you know if we are able to lock him down and get a different time for him. But we appreciate all of you tuning in live. And for those who download the program after the fact, this has been the Orange and Black Insider. We will see you soon. Keep it to cincyjungle.com for all the news, opinions, analysis, breaking news, all that stuff. And we will be doing a post-game reactions video and podcast episode, all that stuff. And we'll keep you up to date on any other additions in terms of shows to the network. Thanks, guys.